History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Fannie Lou's Classroom. We're super excited once again, as I say, every week for an amazing conversation with a powerful guest. And he's not new. He is a brother in the struggle. He is our former executive pastor here at Friendship West, and we're super excited to have him. But before I get to that, you know, we got to shout out Brooke, who holds it down every Thursday, which is why you have this incredible sound, this amazing visual on your screen. So thank you, Brooke, for holding it down. And, of course, we have Cheryl and Shanika, who make sure that I'm ready to go from week to week, doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work to make sure that we're ready every week. And we have a few ministry partners who also help us with research and getting us ready for each episode. So we're grateful for them. And you can join us. You're more than welcome to join the team. All you have to do is email flc@friendshipwest.org. We can use every area of expertise. Are you creative? We need you. Are you a social media guru? We need you. Are you one who loves to come up with episodes and write? We need you. Whatever gift you have, right, Cheryl?
Yes.
We can use you on Fannie Lou's Classroom's team. So certainly reach out to us if you are able to do that. We would love to have you as a part of our team. And you can also support us in two ways. Number one, make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and of course YouTube, and make sure you hit the notification bell to be alerted when we go live, and let everyone else know. So share this across all your platforms to join us in the classroom from week to week. We try to have conversations around issues that are critical and important to our communities, and we try to do that in a way at the intersection of religion, faith, and politics. And so we want to do that so we all can understand what we're up against, what we need to have our attention on, and more importantly, what we can do as individuals to be engaged in various movements, but also individuals that work as a collective to make sure that we can fight these systems and institutions to really bring about a just and equitable world that we know that God has designed and desired for us to have. But it's on us as human beings to recognize the humanity in all of us so that we can make that a reality. So let me introduce our guest. That's what I was going to say. Buy your T-shirt to support the work that we do. So if you're watching on your phone, you can go to friendshipwest.org/justice, and you'll see a link that says Fannie Lou's Classroom. If you are viewing on your tablet or on your TV, computer, etc., you can simply scan the QR code and we'll get that shirt out to you as soon as possible. And that just helps us keep the classroom going and have so many amazing guests that we bring every week. And you can go back from season 1 and see all the powerful guests that we've had, an amazing, enlightening, and powerful and educational conversation. So go ahead and purchase that T-shirt, and we will be so forever grateful. And we're thankful for those who have purchased your Fannie Lou's Classroom T-shirts. We thank you for your support. So we have Reverend Damien Durr, who is a native of Cleveland, Ohio. He attended American Baptist College and Vanderbilt University. As a presidential scholar at ABC and Kelly Miller Smith Fellow at Vanderbilt, he helped facilitate various initiatives and discussions involving childhood education, juvenile justice, the prison industrial complex, Black church studies, and cultural criticism. He also served as the youth and young adult pastor at the Temple Church in Nashville, Tennessee. During his time in Nashville, he worked for the Children's Defense Fund and served in the Metro Nashville Public School system as a social and emotional specialist and coach to multiple African-American boys. An extension of his undergraduate and graduate work has been incorporated through programs and published works via the Haynes Middle School Mentoring Program, the Bishop Michael Lee Graves Leadership Academy, and he has also co-produced numerous documentaries addressing the role of the church and intellectual in the Black community. He served as the former executive director of Faith Forming Human Services and executive pastor of community development at Friendship West Baptist Church here in Dallas, Texas. He currently serves as the president of the Gus Newport Project in DCD Empowerment. Let's welcome back to Fannie Lou's Classroom my brother and my friend, Reverend Damien Durr.
Thank you so much. Honored to be back in the place one more time in Fannie Lou's classroom. Thank y'all.
We're super excited to have you. So you were here with us in season 3.
Right.
And so we posed the rhetorical questions, are Black institutions still relevant? So we had a really good, enlightening, educational, and I would even say uplifting conversation around the history of organizations and institutions that really paved the way. Right, for us. So many of us, these nice shade trees we rest under is because our ancestors did the work of building systems and institutions, right?
That's right.
And so when we talked about the new challenges that we face, right, in this current century, particularly in 2023, 2024. So you lifted up a text during that conversation. And it was Hope and Healing, Black Colleges and the Future of American Democracy by John Wilson Jr. So I thought, we got to have you back because in light of where we are, if we want to marry HBCUs and democracy, I feel this would be a good time to have this conversation. And, we'll probably broaden it a bit. But I think in light of as many people, if you're watching the news at all, paying attention to the news at all,
right.
There are students across the country on college campuses who are setting up encampments to protest the genocide that's happening in Gaza. And so, of course, you have students from all backgrounds, right, who are engaging in this protest. And so I think we think about our Gen Z generation. We think about our millennials who are taking a very public stand, right, to be clear about we are against, genocide in Gaza. And in like fashion of SNCC folk, right?
That's right.
And we know that a lot of movements and a lot of really what sets the course for what are our morals in this country comes from those young people.
That's right.
Right, who are willing to risk it all up and against, like back in the day, right? Some people had a lot to lose, right? So, unless you're Fannie Lou Hamer, a middle-aged Black woman who rolled up on SNCC and was like, I want to be a part of this. And she learned from those students in Ella Baker. But, right, it is a lot of our young people now who are taking this stand. So I thought it might be important as we think about the genocide in Gaza, but also this democracy is hanging on by a thread, right? When we think about that, I know it's early for polls, but the fact that it's close.
Right.
To me, sends a signal, right, that we need to be very concerned about the future of this really still fledgling democracy, right? And we talk about a racial democracy, 59, 60 years.
Right.
It's been a racial democracy. Some people still alive when the Voting Rights Act was passed, right? So I think that compare that with the young people, with this election season upon us, and you have a former president who won. Is clear about what he's going to do if he gets reelected.
I read that Time article.
The Time article that I sent you, that he feels he was too nice the first time around.
Isn't that? Yes, right.
Right. So you think about, I'm trying to kind of set the stage for this, right, as we have this conversation around our institutions, why they're so critical.
Right.
So you have him doing that. Then you have the Christian nationalists who are saying if he doesn't win, if you thought January 6th was something.
Get prepared for
Get prepared for if he. So I'm saying that I applaud our young people for doing that because this is what some of us older folks need to also understand that we too need to put something on the line here because I really believe this is a crossroads and which way are we going to go?
That's right.
Right, and so I think that's so important for us to think about and understand because they will shape the future. And if we're really going to have a real just, equitable world and a real racialized democracy where really everyone not only is heard, respected, have the right to a free and fair election without violence, without threats, and without a president coming after you personally, like the sisters in Georgia. Right, or Rudy Giuliani, his little henchmen, right, or just
who he still ain't paid back.
Right, right. They still running their money.
Right.
But I'm saying that I think the fact that they're standing up and how do we harness that energy, right, and to move that into some organizing beyond just genocide in Gaza and connecting the dots that you also have genocide in the Congo.
Right.
You also have genocide by another name in many of our communities through environmental racism. Right, structural violence, but just trying to connect those dots. And I think that's so important. And because they're in school in these institutions, how do we make sure that we support our institutions in a way that really prepare them for that. And we were talking a little earlier before we came on air about, the important, work of Dr. Greg Carr at Howard.
That's right.
And how he's really, I think, training those students to be those kind of people in the world. And so just this past week, though, a lot has happened with HBCUs in the headlines.
That's correct.
Good and bad, right? So we think about all the money that has not been paid to our public colleges and universities around the country, right? And we know the face really is Tennessee State University at this point, right? You have North Carolina A&T, and many others who have not received the funding they should have, but had to function
without it,
like their counterparts who were white public schools, right? Then I was looking at Xavier University. They're going to be partnering with the healthcare system in California to have a satellite. No, that's Houston-Tillotson. They plan to have a satellite campus in California, which will be the first HBCU in California. So Xavier is going to now become the fifth, on the verge of becoming the fifth HBCU with a medical school. So it'll be the only medical school on the Gulf Coast. And so that's significant because we know a lot of medical schools still train students to see Black folks as not as fully human, that our pain, we have a high tolerance for pain, there's some kind of way that we could be superhuman in some regards, but we don't get the necessary medical care we need. So now you have another, HBCU getting ready to turn out some medical professionals who can have cultural competency, as well as making sure healthcare disparities are eradicated, right? We hope, right? But that's the training. And so I'm thinking Xavier, HT, and then Howard, I read 37,000 undergraduate admissions,
right?
Up 12%. So I think
submissions. Was it 37,000 submissions? Submissions, right?
And it's like 30 to 32% acceptance rate, but those admissions are up 12%.
Right.
And I would imagine we'll see more and more of that, as time passes. But I just thought, just kind of looking at protests on the campuses, the kids are taking a stand now. These are HBCUs. You're seeing they don't have the funding in the public university. We're dealing with that battle, but at the same time, like we always do, we're resilient.
Right.
We still find ways to still excel. So I just think the innovativeness of I can think about Paul Quinn with Michael Sorrell here in Dallas, Texas, what he's done, right, to be a work-study college. And just how we're thinking out of the box. He was telling, I'll expand out to California. Let's get that experience there. Exactly. Like we need a medical school, with all like Black maternal health.
Right.
The disparity there. So just the fact that we're thinking ahead and saying, well, what do we do to save ourselves? But how do we make sure our institutions, though, have all the resources that are strengthened to do that? So we can jump in. I just kind of wanted to lean into that kind of frame it that way, what we're dealing with this upcoming election, what's at stake. Because if he get in, all this other, you talking about needing institutions.
You got that right.
Right.
And a passport. You gonna want to have both.
You might want to have your dual citizenship. Ghana said you can come get your citizenship here. I don't know about Canada. They talking about closing that border, but let us get in and get us something right quick before you close it, so we can come on across when it's time. But all that is working at the same time. Like we're having to manage all of this, and I thought we might talk about just our institutions today and what role they can play, because I see some of them are already moving in directions that can be beneficial to us. So let's just jump right in then. So first tell us about, I want you to talk about the book you mentioned, because I know you probably know it backwards and forwards at this time, but I thought it'd be good for you to kind of walk through that text for us so people can hear, because I thought it was interesting that he connected to the future of democracy.
Correct.
So maybe you can just tell us the thesis of the book. Maybe we can start with just what the thesis of the book is. Why?
Right. So thank you. And so, and Dr. Wilson, who was a former president of Morehouse, but he was also a Morehouse grad and a Harvard grad. And so what he frames as a thesis is so much of what you said, which is the value proposition he believes that HBCUs provided is what's necessary for American education in general. He said, obviously, it's significant for us, but he was saying the value proposition in terms of the character optimization models that took place at HBCUs is necessary for all American education to have not a single issue focus, but to look at intersectionality. And so he talks about in a recent interview how he said, when I went to Morehouse, what I received in terms of I went from an object to a subject. I was seen, I was loved, I was affirmed, I was nurtured. And he said it put a crown on my head. He said then when I went to Harvard, they tried to take the crown and put question marks over me. And so he said at that point, the crown found was too big from what he had gotten from the HBCU that he was able to override the questions that the PWI obviously put over his head. And so his thesis to a great degree is he saw how Harvard needed what Morehouse had in terms of character development and developing moral agents, in a sense, who cared not just about their own social climbing or being able to have their own resources, but cared about a world that could be just and a world that could be equitable. But then he said he saw that what Morehouse needed was what Harvard had, which was the capital optimization model to obviously create the kind of funnel of money, involved trustees, involved giving that allowed them obviously to be the wealthiest institution in the world in terms of their endowment. So he also even served on the board at Harvard, and he served as an executive consultant to president at Harvard. So as his premise is, I have seen what both offer, but I know that the value proposition that's important, if we're talking about democracy, in his words, are that what was done at HBCUs that helped create students that were enlightened, that were aware, that were engaged, that cared about the world in which they were inheriting, but also how was the world possibly becoming more toxic, and what they could do, obviously, to help solve that and challenge that. And that came from a particular kind of education. He gives the example of Bill Gates admitting, 2007, he comes back to Harvard. He admits, when I left Harvard, I had no inkling of the injustices that were taking place in the world and how decisions that were being made that relegated people's lives to the margins. And then he parallels that with when King says, what Benjamin Elijah Mays was clear about is that the students that will leave this institution under, obviously, King's time there, the students that leave here will bring light to darkness. The students that leave here will be using their education to help liberate the world and help challenge those systems and structures that don't allow for human flourishing. So that's the basis of what the main thesis is. And then, of course, he does an amazing job of looking at what happened at Tuskegee, because he re-narrates Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And so he looks at Booker T. with the capital optimization model, getting there in 1881 with 0 buildings. And then by 1915, leaving with 111 brick buildings, leaving with Tuskegee owning 2,300 acres of land, leaving with a faculty of 200 and a student population of over 1,500 students by the time Booker T passes. So and an endowment of $2 million. Oh, let me forget that. Don't let me forget that. Yeah. And an endowment of $2 million in the 35 years that he was the president. And so he's throughout the book, he's comparing how other institutions, it took them 86 years to do what Booker did in 35 years, right? Over and against the odds that he was under or up against in terms of and what he does is we don't talk about them white folks saying that they was going to lynch Booker. We don't talk about that he couldn't go back to Tuskegee for 6 months after he went to the White House, because oftentimes we talk about him going to the White House and Carnegie and Rockefeller and the money, but he couldn't go back to Tuskegee for 6 months because there was a price on his head for what he was doing, which was leveraging those dollars, right, to ultimately build a workforce and build Black excellence. And of course, Pastor Ayers remembers, we went to Tuskegee. We didn't talk about this last time, but I'm gonna just say this quickly. We went to Booker T's house, right, and Booker T's house, which is 8,000 square feet. Now, this house was built in the late 1900s, like they finished in 1901. I think it took them 2 or 3 years. 4 enclosed porches. First to have gravity plumbing, right? 14 karat gold in the bathroom, a detached kitchen. Right. When they showed us Booker's office, a chair that had come from China made out of dragon heads. And they also made us aware of the fact that at one point there was a student there from every continent except for Antarctica. This is before Instagram, this is before YouTube, this is before Facebook. So his premise too is Booker is not just one of the greatest HBCU presidents, he is by far one of the greatest presidents of an institution in American history. And so he looks at what Booker was able to promote, and then he looks at, of course, what Du Bois in terms of dealing with the problem of the color line,
Right.
who also was a HBCU grad, as
Right.
Booker and Du Bois were HBCU grads, and the way in which Du Bois, through what he understood about the issues of the color line, using the best of himself, right, to deal with matters of significance, which were about racial justice, economic justice, and political justice. So he says that HBCUs brought together had Tuskegee as an example of kind of the character and the capital in one sense, but he looks at Booker and Du Bois fresh, right, and gives a different perspective on what they provided for us. And his premise is, if we don't take a look more thoroughly at what happened on those campuses at HBCUs as a value proposition for how we need to approach democracy holistically, then, as you said in your opening comments, we are in extreme trouble. And I think we're seeing that take place now with young folks who are making decisions to engage because this is a history of protest. This is a history of agitation. This is a history of willingness to stand up and stand for, right, making our world a better place.
So, you said so much, and I have so many follow-ups. The first I want to start with, because I was going to go to Tuskegee, and we went there. So the first thing I'm going to say is a funny thing that me and him said. Because I had never been to Tuskegee, so we went to
I know what you're going to say.
So before we get to the camp, I think we were going to go around.
Right. We were doing a tour.
City. Mm-hmm. So we turned after we left campus, we took about 2 turns, and we both were like Booker T gonna walk out here in any minute. So it's just amazing to see all of the university, but the city itself just seemed to be frozen in time, right? But also Tuskegee with that rich heritage, I think this is the second anonymous donation. They recently got another $20 million donation, anonymous donation, that go towards STEM.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's another HBCU highlight, right?
Right.
But to your point too, in Tuskegee, and when you go to Tuskegee, you see all that land that they have.
Right.
Certainly as an agricultural a school that really has a lot of agricultural programming too, right? But also the Center for Epidemiology.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I think sometimes we also forget how rich in what's on our campus. And to your point, when they told us that someone from a student from every continent back then, I was like, okay.
Right.
So to your point, not just a good HBCU president, but a president of a college.
Correct.
And I think it also lends itself to what we know we have at our institutions is so valuable. And I think forward thinking.
Yes.
And I think so inclusive, right? Because we have to be able to see how the world works for everybody.
Right.
Right. So we don't have the blind spots. Like you mentioned about John Wilson saying that, Harvard needs what Morehouse has by way of, when a student leaves what they're able to understand about the world and their place in the world, et cetera, right? And all the intersectionalities of that. And so I think about, to me, that's what I was so impressed with Tuskegee. And even going to the George Washington Carver Museum, where I said he had the first food truck.
That's right.
When he went around and had produce and seeds to get with the farmers. So I'm saying all that to say that our institutions are so important because it's not just about the books.
That's right.
Right? It's about how do we really prepare our students or anyone who comes through.
Right.
Because then you have a lot of people, more and more, I'm seeing more and more, even in advertisement where they're showing non-Black students.
Right.
Being at the HBC, was it Langston or Lincoln that had the white president and the sister who unfortunately
That was Lincoln. Right.
Now that's another conversation.
It is.
Because that's very problematic,
right?
For me. But just the idea of I'm seeing that others are seeing the value.
Yes.
That we always knew we had.
That's right.
And I'm asking the question, what are you seeing? I mean, for a non-Black, we know why we roll up in there for the most part, but were they forego a PWI to come to this all-Black space? Because I see on the billboards now, even going down 35 here in Dallas, I don't know, I can't remember what HBCU it was, but it was showing, a very much diverse group.
Of course.
And I'm just, so what I hope happens that we understand, and I think we will, that we don't lose sight of what really grounds us.
Right.
Because I think it's important. And I'm telling you why. Another thing I was looking at, it's 800 pages. I think I sent it to you, maybe Project 2025.
Oh, I've seen it.
Seen it, right?
I've seen it.
And so I think about, okay, we do have institutions, HBCUs, that can be these holders of research, of data collection. Because when I look at that and I look at all the institutions that were a part of putting that together,
Yeah, it's something.
like over 400 policy analysts, et cetera. So I'm looking at, so talk to us about, talk about what John Wilson, if he leans into, and in what way, of how we not only use those institutions just to train our students and educate our students on how to be well-rounded people in the world, but how do we really begin to use those as places to have policy institutes, for example, to collect data for ourselves and interpret that data for ourselves, and to put what the NAACP used to do and Urban League used to do. They don't do those reports anymore. So can you talk to us about that? Like, how do we begin to use our organizations to do just that kind of work?
Well, that's a great point, because one of the points that he mentions is obviously what HBCUs did initially, because he talks about what took place between 1860 and 1890 in terms of the illiteracy rate that we had. And so he said, obviously, by 1910, that 50-year time period, black illiteracy is up to 77%. And so he says that by that point, black folks are more literate than 17 different countries, Russia, Italy, Greece included. And of course, he talks about the initial role of HBCUs was to deal with the illiteracy, poverty, and marginality gap. That's what he said the role initially for the first half of the century was. And so then he says now what he recognizes, to your point, is that now the role of HBCUs has to be more intentional about the civic illiteracy or civic literacy gap. And so he posits that being critical for HBCUs. He didn't go into maybe naming which HBCUs would be best akin for that, but he does, his point is he does recognize, or is saying that the civic literacy does have to increase, which lends itself to when we talk about think tanks, because when you talk about that Project 2025, you're talking about one, capital, because the money that is paid. Then you're talking about the nonprofit, the Heritage Foundation, right? When you talk about nonprofit entities that are a part of that, and then you talk about policy analysts, lobbyists. I mean, because they've lined up like everything and everybody from the data analysis point of view to who's going to be lobbying, who's already in office, who do they have on the faith side. So it's a extremely protracted and very intentional effort that they've put together. And so I think what Wilson says, and what I think is critical, is how do HBCUs maybe think about partnering differently maybe than they have before? Because he talks about getting the AME bishops together years ago, 6 of them. And he proposed to them then that we need to be thinking about uniting our schools. And he said the meeting was over after the first 5 minutes. Now that's disheartening in a sense, because he said, I've already been talking about how we have to collaborate our efforts, because if we're going to deal, because what they do is obviously, even though they obviously don't like each other, or they don't, some of them maybe don't respect each other as much, whatever, because they have a common agenda, they figure out how to deal with those differences. They figure out how to work together in spite of those differences. So he does posit, and he talks about the need for more, I think, collaboration among HBCUs if we're going to be able to, I think, to produce. But the point is, we're not lacking.
That's right.
We're not lacking the brain power. We're not lacking the organizational competency. We're not lacking the character, the capital, and the collective will sometimes is, can we move out of some of the individualism or tribalism that we sometimes seem to have based upon having respect in a place, or having altars, for lack of a bit. I'm thinking about the altars where we worship, right? We kind of become altars in certain positions. So I think when we're talking about what's being used, and the point you brought up again, the Flexner report, which somebody just sent me was it this week or last week? It's over a 300-page report that talks about how HBCU medical schools got closed and the way in which data was used as a means of justifying that they don't need to be closed. And we are the ones who, again, had poor hygiene. I mean, it goes into, it's similar. It reminded me of the Moynihan report. That's one of the initial things that it made me think about. So I think it's, one, are we mining HBCUs to see who is producing reports already, or who has some policy analysis, or what political science departments can be used, or even at somewhere like a University of Louisville. A colleague of mine is now he's the chair of the Pan-African Studies Department. Mm-hmm. Are we tapping into black talent that's in leadership over places, something like that, where they would have a very different analysis? It can be data driven, but it's never going to negate the Afrophobia and the white supremacy and the anti-black sentiment that undergirds so much of what we see when it comes to policy decisions and the use of data.
Right. And that Moynihan report was government led and funded.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you talking about real money and resources behind putting out a report like that.
Correct.
Right. And so I think then, to your point, we have to, meaning the HBCUs, have to think different. And I think is what part do they play in this large, because like we talked about, all the different organizations came together, Heritage Foundation, nonprofit, faith community, political community, in that Project 2025, who pulled that together. So it's about the role, what role should our institutions play? What role should our churches play? What role should our civic organizations play?
Correct.
But to your point, and to a degree, we have to get out of our own way. And because to your point, some people have erected themselves as altars. Right. But then in some ways, we have erected altars.
That's correct. That is correct.
And so everything is so personality driven. Right. And that's not to our benefit. You can't pull out one person at 2025 project report and say, we're following that person.
Right.
But everybody put their, whatever expertise they had, it all came together. Because they have a common agenda of maintaining power and domination over everybody else. Right. So whether the demographics show by a certain year that they'll be the number one minority, it won't matter.
That's correct.
Because they're looking at how, that's what that whole report is saying. Here's how, not just in America, because some parts it talks about sub-Saharan Africa. Like they're talking about globally how they maintain this power, because we're the global majority anyway. Correct. Thank you, Karen Hunter and Dr. Greg Carr, for reminding us that, right? That we're the global majority, and they know that. But if they're maintaining, it won't matter. And that's what I want us to begin to think about. What's the counter to that? Right. What's our counter move? They're looking 50, 100 years down the road.
All the time. And you know, the point you bring up is, how do we look at somebody like Stacey Abrams? So when we talk about how do you go from dealing with a system that made sure that you didn't get elected, the strategize, organize, and mobilizing, I'm just talking about how do we, do we have an example? Yeah, we have a modern day example of somebody who took the loss and then went to work in similar fashion to organize and mobilize and galvanize to create a different outcome. So how are we mining those among us who've been able to deal with them crackers and that at that level? Because that's how they function. And, I mean, they function with a cracker spirit in Georgia. The way they dealing with, I mean, let's just be.
This Fannie Luce speak your truth.
Thank you. You know what I'm saying? So that's what what you just said is looking at somebody like her. And again, it's not erecting her as just a singular voice, but somebody who got receipts and results that could also be helpful when you think about the energy that you have on college campuses and the brilliance that you have on college campuses, or what you have in communities in terms of civic organizations, the Divine Nine, the faith community, nonprofits. I think she's somebody that just immediately, when you were talking, she's somebody that immediately popped in my mind because of the strategic and intentional, and the point that's important in my mind, the groundhog work. Because sometimes we so concerned with gorilla, we don't work enough on groundhog. Gorilla is, I'm telling you everything I'm doing. I'm showing you everything I'm doing, right? I want you to be aware. There is value in that because it's motivation and it's inspiration and it's new information, while simultaneously you sometimes are showing your hand too much. Where sabotage, because they already trying to always figure out how they're going to sabotage our organizations, our efforts in any regard. So how do we also work? Because Stacey worked, it seemed like she was working underground. Obviously it was public what she was doing and where but the strategy.
You did not know that.
You didn't know it.
And at Proctor, when she was at Proctor a few years ago, right? And she, to your point, she talked about when she lost, she went through her stages of grief.
That's correct.
Then she said, I went to plotting and planning.
That's it. Plotting and planning.
Plotting and planning. That's what, that was her language she used, right? And when you think fair count, some people may think Stacey Abrams. Other people are going to think that organization that flipped Georgia, that organization that goes on the ground, because she didn't make it about her.
Right. That's right.
She's built a system, an institution, a infrastructure, so somebody else can keep that work going.
That's right.
Which is what we don't do well. We don't like doing succession planning for that reason, because it's something about if I'm doing succession planning in some kind of way, I'm maybe moving myself out the way. What does that mean for me? And I always, Dr. Mama Tahari, always is like, in the village, we all have a role to play, and as we age, it just shifts. You're still as relevant. Yeah. What you have to offer is very valuable. Your role just shifts.
Right.
So we have to learn how to move into our proper roles in the village so we can function, right, in ways that can really lead us to flourishing. But other than that, we'll do what happened with the bishops or the AMEs that came together. We got a common agenda here to survive and thrive.
Right. Right.
Is it one? We don't have one thing we can come together on and work on that. It's fine. You can keep your kingdom over there. But we need to use your resource you have here to do X, Y, Z, right? And we had Dr. Lester McCorn on a few weeks ago with Clinton College in Rock Hill, North Carolina. And, he's talking to us. It's almost like a situation with Paul Quinn, like a Mike Sorrell. Like, he's really doing a lot of good work in community development. He just kind of ran down all the great stuff. And he's gotten almost over $1 million in grants to do a lot of work in community and to really connect the college with the city. Right. And so I hear those stories of those smaller universities that we don't really hear about.
Right.
We typically, like, even me in my open, I'm with Howard, Xavier. HT is probably one you don't hear about often.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
But how do we lift and celebrate all of our HBCUs and universities? So that way we know, so we need to do something around, community economic development. Let's reach out to Dr. McCorn at Clinton College. He doesn't need to be a Morehouse or Howard to be noticed,
That's right. That's right.
He's doing the work. And so he will be someone at the table, to your point. Brandon McCormick?
Right.
That you mentioned, University of Louisville, like his brilliance. Okay, because you need to have all different perspectives.
That's right. That's right.
We all can't think the same way sitting at the table. And then just honor what's at the table, and moreover, the collective goal to beat back this plan that's already, because if I'm reading it in 24 and it's about 25.
Right, which they already had put it, and the whole point is they made it public, so they're saying we're not hiding, but what we didn't know is the work that was being done, right? That wasn't talked about. It's just that this now, which means everybody is on the same page, even in terms of holding their cards close to the vest, or just not saying anything at all about anything, but just working, and they also do a good job, like magicians sometimes, of sleight of hand, in terms of it can be labeled one thing, but it means what its outcome is something totally different than what you. Hence, Hence the Frank Luntz, who is a Republican pollster who is responsible for a lot of the language of Bush and others in the Republican Party. He wrote a book called Words That Work. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. And so in the book, he even gives you the breakdown of how, when Bush was elected, instead of saying drilling for oil, he called it energy exploration. So he chose all of the ways in which he changed the language so that when you heard it, you would never equate it to what the real agenda was. And I think that if we've done nothing else, we've obviously known how to code switch, obviously in multiple regards, and know how to speak in the presence of folks who want our demise in ways that they not clearly understanding. Right? We've always understood how to smuggle truth in without tipping our hand. And I think that that's why I think all of this stuff has to be strategically thought about from like a chess perspective,
for sure,
of how you are moving in ways that are intentional, and sometimes intentional distraction, because that's what they do too, right? Take your focus off of what you maybe need to be focused on, and then we can distract you with something foolish about what a newscaster said or what.
Well, because I think to a degree Trump is the distraction.
Yes.
Because you focus on he's outrageous, but the whole time, right? They doing the real work of maintaining and gaining all kind of power in every level of government,
right?
From municipalities on up,
right?
And globally, right? And so, so that, I'm not going to say that, but yeah, that's what's important to me is like, how do we begin to see the critical nature that we all need to survive this thing collective? And that might mean other people going to join in, which we need, because we, black folk, or like black women, we know we got to really push for maternal care, because if we get it, guess what? Every woman's going to benefit.
Right.
And it's just like those black folks. We've been doing this since we landed on this, in this country, particularly, as being captured, because we were here before Columbus, who never made it. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that I really, and I think that's why we'll name the book again, because I think it's really good for people to get that book and to read it, to kind of see that it's not just a place where we send our children to get a degree. Right, we're sending our children here to learn how to be global, particularly in this generation, to be global citizens. Right. And what does that mean to honor the humanity in people and to be able to have an insult level? Yeah. Where you can really understand, this is what they're doing to us. Is because that, to your point, switching them words around. Right. Because what you hearing and what I mean by impact is different.
That's correct.
Because you hearing this and you think the outcome is going to be here, but I already know the outcome and impact I want is this. Right. And so how do we begin to, I don't know where we start. I know sounds like, Dr. Wilson has given us a roadmap to what it means to pull us in a room and realize here's what everybody has to offer. You all have this resource. Now let's come together and use that, right, for this more larger role that we need to play in society, period. Like to be more than just where students come to be educated. So, and it was something else that you mentioned as you were talking about words, right? So you a preacher, you're a good preacher. So we know words is all we have as a preacher, right? So how do we use those words to convey a particular message? And so I'm wondering though, what is the word today? Like what is our narrative? Do we have a narrative?
Well, and it's interesting because Wilson's grandfather was great-grandfather was the first preacher to be recorded. So he comes from a family of preachers, so he brings a theoethic to his analysis of understanding the value of, and again, his theology is a bottom-up theology, and understanding what that means, as Luke chapter 4 obviously has been the central piece in dealing with this call. And so I think that, and the books that have been helping me, one, continue to have a language of hope has been this book, and then Luther Smith wrote a book, former professor at Emory, called Hope is Here, Spiritual Practices for Nurturing Justice and Beloved Community, where he then offers these 5 practices that I think influence, and I'm giving a long answer to your short question quickly, these 5 practices that he offers, one being contemplative prayer, 2 being prophetic remembering, 3 being crossing identity boundaries, 4 being transforming conflict, and 5 being celebrating community. And he kind of lends himself to what those practices, and he defines what that means, and he interviews people in the book while he's giving some about his own journey. He's doing case studies of people who embody those practices. So just thinking about one in terms of prophetic remembering, when we see whether it's an attack on DEI or when we see the attack on history, part of that is what, as Oshawa Kwesi would say, they never want you to tap into and open your cultural memory bank. But this notion of if we can miseducate you in regard to history, or if we can disinform you or misinform you in terms of history, then you won't ever really grasp hope, because the hope is oftentimes in the historical arc that we tap into that gives us proximity, and again, it helps us recognize what I'm connected to. This is a continuum. I'm connected to a lineage of freedom fighters. I'm connected to a lineage of creators. And of course, as I will say all the time, when you talk about word, when I was a teacher, first thing my students got when they came in my classroom was what we call the empowerment and the liberation package, which included what? The first thing was a list of African-American inventors. Second page was a list of inventions by African-American women. Third was inventions by black folks for the railroad. And fourth was inventions by George Washington Carver, because that was the first thing that I wanted to give you to destroy and or level any internalized inferiority you came in here with. Let me begin to start you with not just slave ships and chains.
Right.
Let's go back to where this genius like a Granville T. Woods, who had all of these inventions, where he came from. Let's draw that back to the continent, or like a Benjamin Banneker who was connected to the Dogon tribe. So I think when we look at the attacks, and let's be clear too, what we don't talk about enough, the problems that we are facing is not because people stayed at home during a pandemic. The problems that we are dealing with is not because people have been apathetic. It is not because people have majored in mediocrity. Let's be 1,000 about this, which we don't talk about enough, is the issues and the challenges and the problems that we are facing is because people decided at a time which none of us had ever lived through that they would storm the polls at a level never before seen in the history of this country, while simultaneously dealing with Confederate monuments coming down, Confederate flags coming down, and storytellers like a Ava DuVernay coming and putting a mirror up to America's face. Because what we don't want to deal with is what happened from 2012. And I talk about this, of course, when I'm looking at When They See Us, when I'm looking at 13, when I'm looking at Birth of a Nation, when I'm looking at Hidden Figures, when I'm looking at all of Black Panther. These then become narratives, right, that begin to offer a counter narrative, and then Bree Newsom goes up the flagpole and creates a whole new conversation about the Confederate flag and what that black woman was willing to do in terms of risk her life. But she had that white brother who was an ally who held onto the flagpole. That's why they didn't touch her.
That's right.
Because the white brother said, you're going to have to come through me.
That's
because it's going to look different. But that is what,
right.
what we are dealing with, is the white lash or the white backlash from progress. So that's what we sometimes, so for me, since you asked the question about word, some of that is grounded in, I'm connected to this legacy and history of people who were underfunded, $13 billion with the land grant, and we know that's just underfunded. But what we were able to do, right, in the midst of that kind of underfunding, and how we didn't just survive, but we flourished. And I think that sometimes when I'm looking at culture, when I'm looking at politics over just the last 10 years, I say 2012, 2014, but all of the stuff that happened, when those players at Mizzou took that stand and they engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience and said, we ain't gonna play, and the chancellor gone, the president gone, the vice, we ain't talking about those narratives enough to help us understand why we are dealing with what we, it's just like after Reconstruction, right? All of this that we are seeing, his election was, I'm talking about 40, what did Doc used to call it?
45 minus 1.
You hear me? So all of that,
that's right,
for me becomes so those practices that Smith gives us is that prophetic remembering, and he talks about prophetic remembering in terms of thinking about your own history, with the divine, but then the people that you come from. And what they overcame. And so I think that we have to look sometimes not just 30 years ago, but just look in the last, before, when Charlottesville, look at what has happened. And I have colleagues from Mississippi whose parents said they never thought that they would see the Confederate flag come down as the state flag during their lifetime. So we got they angry. They upset.
Sure. And I think just historically, Doc does this all the time, and we know this as students of history and reading, that every perceived progress of black folk, right, you're going to have a backlash.
That's correct.
So for me, it's about, that's why I think our institutions are so critical, because we will be on the front end of all this. You already know the playbook has not changed.
Correct.
They're always going to respond, which to me seems like they're always working.
Right.
So even as you making progress, they're like, we got to stop this progress. We're going to go to work, right? So I think that's so important. And, and I think to your point, as the flags came down, the statues came down, what I think should have been more attentive to as well. That went down, but what's going up by way of policies and laws? Right. What's happening inside that state house? Right. Inside but I think it's the both and.
Right. It is.
Because it is something to having visuals.
Yeah, the symbolism.
Symbolisms.
Right.
Thank you. Words.
Right.
Symbolisms.
Right.
Words mean something. But the symbolisms, right? And how we're told not to honor or to venerate those in our history because it's demonic.
That's correct.
But yet you go around many of these, that's what the statues that came down, that's what that was. They venerated those Confederate soldiers and generals, right? So how do we also, and really what you're saying is like, it's this Sankofa moment that we need to always be in. That Sankofa moment can be 200 years ago. It could be 10 years
That's
ago.
right.
It
That's
could be
right.
last year. It's about looking back to what has happened that we might move forward. And I don't know if we pull on that enough to inform, because what I hear a lot of people say now is we don't want to hear about struggle. We don't want to hear about this and that, right? And I'm saying, but you're looking at that struggle up and against looking at being resilient.
That's correct.
You're looking at up and against that there's something that's in you that can overcome what they keep throwing at us.
Right.
But sweeping it away and make pretending does not help us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also how we have to view that, because I think maybe we've allowed another narrative to, another interpretive lens
That's right. That's right.
on what we're watching.
Yeah.
Well, I watch it that way. Same thing I would say with white folks. Then it was like, oh, I don't want my kids learning about this in school. But white people were bad. They own slaves. I said, well, you got an alternative. You can teach your kids to be like the abolitionists. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's all about how you interpret that, right? So I just think that's important as we think about, to your point, of how we look at what's behind us, to where we came from and what's possible. Because that's, to your point, that is where hope comes from.
That's right. That's
So
right.
It
That's
reminds us of what is possible. And then you looked up Luke 4:18-19, right? Since that's our big scripture that we've been really dealing with, and Doc's been going in just on Luke 4:18
Right.
for 2 Sundays.
Right, right.
So, because there's so much in there, and I think those of us, particularly who claim to be Christian, how can we look at that? Just Luke, we can come with a lot of scriptures, but 4:18 in and of itself, that what does it mean for us to be called out, anointed for a specific purpose?
right.
It's not about you getting things, but it's what is God calling you to do. If we look at 4:18, that Otis Moss Jr. would say, that theological sandwich. Where's your role in freeing people up from the bad news of poverty and exploitation? Right?
Right.
What does it mean to what we're attempting to do in Family's Classroom, to educate,
Right. That's right.
to remove the veil, if you will, right, from people. So I think we all have a role to play, and I just think more and more as I'm reading these stories about our HBCUs, and I went back to I'll Find a Way or Make One, where they list all the HBCUs that were founded, but those who have been dissolved, right, where you see all the ones
Right.
that didn't make it.
Right.
And every time I look, just thumb through that book, I'm like,
We've been up against. Because if I'm thinking about, as you mentioned that, if I'm thinking about Mindy Fuller Love's work with Root Shock and Urban Alchemy and people like Clyde Woods with Development Arrested, people who are doing that historical analysis, and even our white brother Richard Rothstein, The Color of Law,
yes.
helping us understand how things have been orchestrated, and working against us. And I think the point you made, which is important, the symbolism and it's like the symbolism and the sustainability. So while those things are coming down, who are the folks that we are electing, and how are our institutions producing the kind of moral agents that can go into public office? And I know we've talked for years about PACs that we needing to start PACs. So some of it could be how do you really put together a fund from an organization or a church to just be a PAC fund, maybe, right? So I'm just saying some of the ways we're trying to think about how do you begin to do that, and then two, how do you look at, since you wearing the Panthers today, critical, because when we look at who was effective, when we talk about one of the most effective, which is why they had to be destroyed, because they understood their civic, their civic and civil rights, and then created programming. They didn't depend on the government, right? That's right. The Panthers didn't depend. As you got on the free breakfast program, that was something that was created, and then what made them so dangerous, which I don't think enough has been given to them, when you talk about the young lords and the young patriots, that's why Fred had to go. Fred had to go because Fred was engaged in transfusion coalition politics. The Rainbow Coalition was Fred Hampton. And what Fred was doing was getting the young lords. These was white boys. And that's why in Judas and the Black Messiah, one of the greatest scenes in the movie, when he go in there, we had to fight a rat to get us this parking space. He said, but if this whole building catch on fire, what's going to be your politics? Water and escape. And he was ultimately saying to them, you all are poor. You all are dealing with living up in the Appalachian Mountains. Right. You all got to say, they ain't educating your kids, right? So what we've always been able to do, in a sense, is be able to show everybody how these issues don't just impact us. The collateral impact is on you as well. But then, of course, Fred has to go because they're getting ready to build a hospital, right? Fred dies when they getting ready to build a hospital for poor folk, as they had already done their work around sickle cell. So I don't think we maybe lean in enough sometimes to somebody like the Panthers or the UNIA, in my opinion, because I said if I went back to school, I always said I would almost want to do a PhD on Garvey because we don't talk about the
that's
UNIA
right. That's right.
Enough.
And his wife.
Right.
Yeah, who did that, who was right alongside him in that work that he did. And so to your point about Fred Hampton, though, see, ultimately, though, it's all about what they're afraid of is the solidarity power.
Yes, correct.
Right? Because Fred was like, what, white power to white people, black power to black people, red power to, because we all have power.
Right.
But it's about how do we pull that together for the greater good. Because I always say, in organizing, we say you always start with a person's self-interest because we all have them.
Correct.
I think for us, though, when us meaning just humans, that self-interest, though, when it overrides the good of the greater good of what we're going after, we got to rein that in.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, our self-interest overrides it all, right? And so Cheryl's giving me the 5-minute hand. As always, this guy always
time
goes
that went that
fast.
quick. Well, I know I saw you, Cheryl, giving the time, but time has went. But that's the point. Try to give a ton of truth with a teaspoon of terms in a short period of time.
Yeah. Words. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Wordsmith over here. So let's wrap it like this. So, first of all, thank you for your insight, your brilliance, in the way in which you always come in and break things down, make that accessible for us. So we appreciate you being here. Let's give it up for Reverend Damien Durr being in the classroom
for a few minutes.
But I don't want us to leave before you tell us about your new book that you have out. Tell people what it's about.
Oh yeah.
And how they can get a copy. And I forgot to bring mine so you can sign it. I have to get it next time.
Okay. So thank you so much. Our new book is Journey Towards Greatness, 21 Days of Focus. You can get it at www.dcdempowerment.com. And it, again, is a second edition of a piece that we had written some years ago when we were teaching in the public school system. And knowing, to your point, knowing about teaching our children, it is not just the transactionalism of school, it was holistic care. And so I was teaching in a poor school in Nashville, teaching primarily black boys, but knowing that we had a couple of my students got murdered, just a lot of different things took place. And so what I wanted to try to offer them was a spiritual devotional that would give them an entry point to thinking about their interior lives or engage in a process of that. It's not to say they don't think about their interior lives because they were writers and poets. So we created it as a devotional, if you will, 21 days of prayer suggestions, of scripture readings. And what we've added now is, of course, same prayer suggestions, scripture readings, but we've added a gratitude matrix. So after each day, it invites you now, right, to have a sense of gratitude, finding out what gratitude does to change the brain, but just giving you something daily to offer gratitude for. And then also we wrote, obviously, a new foreword to it, talking about Jesus and the Disinherited in terms of Thurman.
Nice,
but
yeah.
it's a devotional, if you will, that for 21 days to engage in prayer a specific way, to read certain passages of scripture, to reflect on your own life, and then give you an opportunity to also daily offer a piece of gratitude. And hopefully we look at it as, one, what it can do for you, but also what it may mean when you have to. And of course I deal with, if people call and ask you for something as far as a prayer, or people need word, it also, I look at it as like a spiritual toolkit that can help you provide some hope and help to somebody else.
All right now, amen. So get your copy. Give us the website one more time.
It's www.D as in David, C as in cat, D as in don't stop, empowerment.com, dcdempowerment.com.
Listen, man.
That one was just fresh. I wasn't even trying to do that, right? That one failed because the classroom, that's what the classroom would do to you. That's what Fannie Lou classroom would do to you. That ain't even, we don't take no credit. That's the spirit of Fannie up in the space.
D, don't stop. You own it. You always quick with it, though. You're always quick. You keep me on my toes. You keep me on my toes. I think you're just another good example of what it means. They say iron sharpens iron.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Because we have a lot of...
You're right.
A lot of conversations and, banter, et cetera. And it's helped me a lot. So I sort of appreciate you being that brother, that friend. I'll always be grateful for that. So any last parting word you'll want to say either about the book or about where you see where we need to lean into as it relates to our HBCUs?
Well, I'll say lastly, answer both of those. Again, recommend the book, and if you get a chance, listen to.
This your camera. Hold it
I
up for
forgot.
him.
This is the book right here by Dr. John Wilson, who has then also created an organization. He now directs the Millennium Leadership Initiative for aspiring college presidents. So he then went from a student. He raised the largest money, $70 million, while he was at Morehouse, but now he's created an organization to now I'm gonna continue to share and equip other college presidents to try to do what I've done. So I think that he gives some data, some list of HBCU grads, some ways forward to think about, because as you mentioned, he mentions a term, iceberg governance, and what we need is iceberg governance, where you again are focused on the challenges that you faced, but also coming up with strategies at the same time. And so he talks about a value proposition of HBCUs, iceberg governance, and transformative philanthropic gifts, and found out that he is also connected to the $100 million that Spelman got. So Wilson is also
He working.
Yeah, he working.
But see, and that's what I mean by that's, you're not hearing about all that.
Right.
He's doing the work.
That's right.
And that's the work that creates infrastructure. It's going to outlast him, because when you have a funnel of college presidents, they're going to have a particular mindset. They're going to have a particular way of viewing what it means to be a president of HBCU, right? So he's doing that good work.
Yes.
I love it. Well, thank you, Reverend Durr, so much
Thank you
for
all
being
so
with
much for
us. We
having me. I
appreciate
appreciate it.
So listen, again, you can support us by buying not buying, but making a donation. And you'll receive a Fannie Lou Classroom t-shirt. It helps us keep this going. And remember, Election Day is May 4th, Saturday, May 4th. First Saturday of the month. If you're in the city of Dallas, remember we have a bond proposition, $1.25 billion for infrastructure. Propositions A through J. It's like 10 propositions. But the one most people are really leaning into is Proposition F. So we encourage you to really think of it. They say public safety, and that includes fire, police, but they're only leading into building a new police academy on UNTD's campus. So we want you to make sure you understand what that really means, and do we need more surveillance? Do we need more militarized police training? So we just ask you to vote your conscience, understand what the propositions mean, and definitely vote for the one we fix all these potholes. If you like me, you probably need a wheel alignment from the potholes in this city.
Facts.
But you need to make sure you vote. Make sure you vote. And if you need a sample ballot, you need a voting guide for whatever city you live in the surrounding areas. If you go just to the League of Women Voters, you can find your ballot, no matter where you live, your ballot, and you can get a voting guide that gives you the propositions, what they mean if you vote for or against them. Because some of the other surrounding cities have some propositions as well. But if you're in the city of Dallas, make sure you go vote this Saturday. And if you're in Dallas County, you can come vote at Friendship West. We're open here. We're a voting site here. Just make sure you exercise your right to vote. And that's the other thing. They have all these different elections. All this could have been done back in March. But again, it's a system here, right?
That's correct.
They're going after something here.
That's correct.
And so we want to make sure that we participate and that we vote. So make sure you do that. And then next, it's kind of leaning, kind of piggyback off of where you ended with your talk about your devotional. We're going to have Dr. Melva Sampson with us.
Yes. I saw that. I'm gonna tune in our right mind.
So we're going to have Dr. Melva Sampson with us. So it's not from a psychological or psychiatric standpoint, but this is about how do we lean into our own rituals. How do we have Sankofa moment and remember what did our ancestors use and lean into to be in their right mind when they had to deal with folks who were out of their mind. That's right. And so we have Dr. Melva Sampson next week. I'm super excited to hear from her. She's going to definitely give it to us. It's going to be a great time with her on next week, and that'll be our final episode for season 4 as we look forward to season 5. So we look forward to seeing you next week right here in the classroom.
From the church house.